I'm gonna say this in my best Simon Cowell voice possible. You know what? You might as well just cancel the rest of this year. That's exactly how I feel right now. Alright, back to my normal voice. Hey everyone, welcome to another multi-album review. This week we have two albums to talk about, and I'm sure you can kind of tell, but the disappointment is kicking in heavily this week. I'll just cut right to the chase. These are the two albums that I'm going to be covering this week. The debut KSI album, Dissimulation, and the new 1975 album, Notes on a Conditional Form. I mentioned last week that I was going to be looking at both of these. They both ended up releasing on time, and I listened to each of them, so we are going to be talking about both. Again, I'm trying to spend as much time on this to get a good thumbnail going, but what I will say is, as I mentioned earlier, we are in for some disappointment. If you guys are expecting this to be a very positive video where I give a lot of positive opinions and say very nice things about these albums, I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to look elsewhere because yikes. Enough deliberating, let's just get right on to it. The first album that I will be talking about in this video is the debut KSI album, Dissimulation. Ola Jide Olatunji, aka JJ, aka KSI, is a well-known YouTuber, boxer, and apparently rapper, it seems. You guys might be familiar with KSI, especially if you have followed recent events where in his boxing career he has had a pair of notable fights against none other than Logan Paul. The first of which ended with a tie, and the second of which ended with KSI earning the victory. And now he is here with a hip-hop album. I didn't even really know he was a rapper, but apparently he came through with this 12-track, 34-minute album with a number of big guests on it. So I was thinking when looking at some of the features on here that maybe if these guys are so willing to work with a YouTuber on an album, maybe KSI has something special as a musician. It turns out that no, this album is just painfully generic. The intro track, What You Been On, is a seemingly inoffensive piece of UK rap with the typical dark, minimal, brooding beat that you would come to expect from songs of the genre. But what holds it back is the painfully boring hook and the fact that KSI just decided to run around in a rainstorm of auto-tune that did nothing for his voice whatsoever. And that overuse of auto-tune continues throughout the album, as it feels like JJ just used the auto-tune as a crutch to make himself seem like more of an interesting performer than he actually is. His courses are often laughable, his lyrics are blatantly unmemorable, and the dude feels like he has no versatility whatsoever. He also struggles, I think, to lift tracks on his own all throughout the album. For example, How It Feel is a cut that has one of the most laughably silly choruses on the album, with the same bog standard basic dark trap production that you'd come to expect from music like this, and tracks like Domain and Undefeated literally all sound exactly the same. It's crazy that this record is only 34 minutes because it honestly feels like an eternity. But I will give KSI this. He is at the very least a competent rapper, but I think the most important thing I noticed on this album is that KSI shows, at least at the moment, that he's not much more than another generic YouTuber turned rapper with a natural raw talent for recycling the same sounds over and over again to diminishing effect, with the only real positive of his music being that he's nowhere near as terrible a rapper as like Jake Paul, for example. Now, KSI, like I said, brings a number of features onto this record, but a lot of times it feels like those features are here because KSI is compensating for his own shortcomings as a performer. Offset's verse on Cap is the best part of the song, but it's not like there was much of a bar for him to reach in the first place. Lil Pump and Smoke Perp somehow made me forget that KSI was even on the track Poppin', though I think the beat is a bit colorful on the song. Swarms and Tyon Wayne once again make KSI feel like a feature on his own song on the track Houdini, which if nothing else is a somewhat bouncy and energetic Afro swing track that is far better than most of what else is on this album. Jeremiah proves to be the only interesting part of the track Bad Lil Vibe, thanks to his more emotional vocals, though I actually got a little confused and thought Sway Lee was on one part of the chorus. Trippie Redd comes through and nails it with one of the better choruses on the album on the track Wake Up Call, but KSI lacks anything in the way of charisma on the song, and I feel like this could have been a great track if Trippie got to handle it on his own. Aiyana-Lee's vocals are solid on Killa, and her chorus is kind of bouncy, but again, once KSI comes in, I kind of check out. The auto-tune on his voice is just, no, it doesn't work. Also, somehow JJ managed to get Rick Ross, Lil Baby, and SX on the track down like that, and I mean, I guess I can give it points for the fact that Rick Ross doesn't sound completely like he phoned it in for the check, and maybe because KSI's lyrics have a few interesting allusions to the fight with Logan Paul, that's about as much credit as I can give the song. And sadly, the best part of the album comes right at the end when all hope is lost. Millions really is fireworks compared to mostly everything else on here, and that's largely thanks to the emotional lyrics, most of which deal with the drama JJ dealt with his brother Deji that led to a very public falling out not just with them, but with their entire family. I still think some of the auto-tune heavy mumbled vocals on the chorus detract from the song a bit, but I will say that the lyrics are some of the most potent on the album, and the beat is, if nothing else, emotional enough to make the song work. Unfortunately, the track is really just a rare diamond in the rough, and the rest of the album fails to match the punch of this closer. Yeah, I think you can tell how I feel about this album. If I could say anything nice about it, it's that none of the tracks really sink into the pits that Jake Paul's ear-piercingly awful excuses for music did. But in a lot of ways, I think that might even double as a bit of a negative. Hear me out. Even though Jake's music was complete garbage, and mostly the product of a douchey, narcissistic tool trying to feed his fragile ego and come across as more self-important than he actually is, at least his music was laughably bad. The horrific flows and mind-numbingly awful lyrics, all delivered without even a lick of irony, as awful as they were at least easy to point and laugh at. This record, though, doesn't even feel laughably bad. It's a generic rap album from a YouTuber who, it feels weird to say this, is too competent for his own good, is too standard for his own good. The album isn't bad enough that you'll be entertained by how musically inept it is, but it's also not nearly good enough to be special. I almost feel like the best way to describe it is that it's so inoffensive that it's kind of offensive, just because of how flavorless and bland it is. As I mentioned, KSI in regards to technicality is, if nothing else, leagues better than Jake Paul. But honestly, saying KSI is a better rapper than Jake Paul is like saying a prostate exam is better than a colonoscopy. No matter which one you go through, something's getting put up your ass. Though, in this case, it feels more like KSI just kind of pulled this thing out of his ass. Mostly one-dimensional beat selection, competent but rarely special flows, completely grating use of auto-tune all throughout the album, an utter inability to build a good chorus, and a flailing reliance on spendy big-name features ultimately doomed this project. It might not be the single most migraine-inducing album I've heard this year, but it's one of the most perfect examples of an album that just doesn't matter and doesn't seem to care. Yeah, overall, I'm gonna say that KSI's Dissimulation is gonna get an awful rating from me. Unless you are a huge KSI fan, I would just say don't listen to it. Maybe if your curiosity is intensely piqued, you could do worse with 34 minutes, but still, it's just not that special. But what's worse than a not special album from a YouTuber who obviously doesn't do music full-time? A not special album from a band that I particularly love. Here we go, it's time to talk about the new 1975 album, Notes on a Conditional Form. The 1975, if you don't know already, is a pop rock band from England who had some major success in the mid to late 2010s. I personally got into the group's music around 2017 when I went to re-listen to their debut self-titled album, as well as their creepily titled sophomore album, I Like It When You Sleep For You Are So Beautiful Yet So Unaware of It. Still kind of grosses me out. But both albums are fantastic, and I continue to go back to them today. And I was very interested when the group started teasing their Music for Cars era that started with 2018's A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships. An album that I liked, but not nearly as much as those first two records. I respected the experimentation in sound and some of the layered lyricism on the project, but to me I felt like they didn't take their experimentation as far as they could have, and frontman Matty Healy vocally took a little bit more of a back seat on the project, which I thought was an unfortunate drawback because I think that he is a very charismatic and excellent vocalist, so having him take more of a back seat was just disappointing. Blame it on me getting busy with other music, but I didn't really get to listen to the singles that came out before this record. I'm pretty sure there were like 8 of them, and I think I was a little more focused on the promo cycle, which included Matty Healy hilariously clapping back at Maroon 5 on Twitter and for some reason taking a shot at Ellie Goulding or something like that. Yeah, you'll have to explain the last one to me. I can't really justify that. I was also nervous when I saw the track list because the 1975 has had plenty of long albums before, sure, but wow, 22 tracks at an hour and 20 minutes. Sheesh. Given that some of their previous long albums were so good, I was praying, if nothing else, that this would be one of those all-killer, no-filler type of long albums. Unfortunately, it's actually Filler the album, and this might honestly stand as my most disappointing album of this year. Like every other album from the 1975, this one kicks off with a self-titled track. track. Never letting me down on that front. Though this one is a lot different than the others, as it features a spoken verse from 16-year-old activist Greta Thunberg, who speaks about climate change, and if nothing else, while it's nothing I'll really return to, I respect the band using their platform to make an important statement and allowing Greta to give an impassioned speech on an issue that needs to be discussed. It's an interesting intro, and then we kick into the music properly with People, a big post-hardcore noise rock track that features a very scream-heavy performance from Maddie about generational gaps and politics. It's a rager of a track that definitely took a bit to grow on me, but it's definitely an interesting change of pace for the band that immediately got followed up with an instrumental track, specifically the end Music for Cars. Track 3 is supposed to be the end of the Music for Cars era, but we still have 19 more to go. Oh well, at least the instrumental itself is heavenly and beautiful. I also enjoyed the track Frail State of Mind, which is this light, mellow song that feels like a mixture of the best elements of Sincerity is Scary and Two Time, which yes, I'm one of the 3 people on the planet that actually like Two Time. And the song sounds beautiful, but again, it's followed up by a short instrumental track, Streaming. It sounds pretty, but wow, just because these short instrumental tracks worked on I Like It When You Sleep, does that mean that they had to do it again? If anything, the name Streaming is really appropriate because this track feels like it's only here to grab a few more free streams. And we get to kick back into the bigger tracks with The Birthday Party, a dream pop-esque slow burner that just kind of feels like a stairway to nowhere. It feels like the whole time it plays you're waiting for a big moment, but that big moment just never comes. And the song itself just kind of threatens to put you to sleep. And then Yeah I Know is one of the biggest letdowns on the album because I wanted to love it. The song has a really glitchy feel, and I actually like some of the vocal filters that Maddie uses on the song, but the chorus, and for that matter the song as a whole, just feels so lazy. Sometimes a track that is minimal or repetitive can be kind of fun, but here, no, it just feels bland. And while the song isn't bad as a vibe, it just dulls out too quickly, feeling like one of the many tracks on the album that just doesn't seem to care and reads as if it was made on complete autopilot. The album doesn't pick up on the track Then Because She Goes, which again has this interesting blend of dreamy rock music, and Maddie's vocals do sound kind of nice, but the song just feels way too skeletal to even make an impression. And it pains me to say this because Maddie has a good knack for putting together catchy hooks, but the chorus on this track is easily one of the blandest the group has ever made. The folk-driven Jesus Christ 2005 God Bless America is unfortunately also one that just goes one ear and out the other. While I like the somewhat ironic and sarcastic tone of the religious imagery in the lyrics, and while Maddie has some decent vocal chemistry with Phoebe Bridgers on the track, the instrumental is just so bland. And while I don't mind the group going for something more emotional, low-key, and acoustic, in fact I kind of welcome it, the song really just lacks the emotional punch that a track like She Lays Down had. Roadkill is also interesting in that the indie rock vibe of the track almost feels like it has some light country influence to it, and again, some of the lyrical themes are interesting as Maddie is dealing with some of his personal demons through humor, but sonically, again, this one just bored me to tears. It feels so drab compared to a lot of the group's other material. I will say though that I did like the Me and You Together song, thanks largely to the bright, punchy instrumentals that call back to some of the group's earlier material. It's honestly one of the few genuine bops on the album, and it's definitely a diamond in the rough on this track list. But while I was happy to have found a track that I really enjoyed, I couldn't believe after listening to Me and You Together song that I was only halfway through the album, and that I still had 11 tracks to go. This is another one of those albums that just feels longer than it is. It somehow felt longer than the digital commencement ceremony that my college held for my graduating class this year, and let me tell you, that was 3 hours of a bunch of talking. I think There's Something You Should Know features some glitchy production, but maybe it would have been interesting if, oh, I don't know, it didn't sound like such a blatant rehash of Frail State of Mind. Hell, that song already felt like a collision of 2 of the group's previous songs, so do the math and figure out how unoriginal it is. If nothing else, I did like Nothing Revealed, Everything Denied, which is an interesting deconstruction of Maddie's artistic persona and himself as a person, complete with this very soulful chorus from Maddie and a choir that adds to the emotional vibe of the song. Really, it's one of the few genuinely wow-worthy moments on the album, as is the follow-up track Tonight I Wish I Was Your Boy, which is a Temptation sampling song that feels mellow, but still groovy enough to stay interesting despite its relaxed vibe. Maddie's vocals are lovely, and the slick guitar strums are a very nice touch too. I was hoping those 2 tracks would help the album get back under control, but then we have Shiny Collarbone, which is probably the most inexplicable track on the album. Cuddy Ranks delivers some subtle, weirdly processed vocals over this bog standard electronic instrumental that sounds like everything else the group has on this album. It's a total throwaway whose purpose on the album I genuinely question. Though I did enjoy the single If You're Too Shy Let Me Know, thanks to its punchier, more up-tempo production and the catchy vocals from Maddie on the hook. The vocal filters took a little bit to get used to, but the song is still one of the better ones on the album, though we get right back into disappointment with the track Playing on My Mind. While I again like the lighter feel of the acoustic instrumentals and Maddie's more broken vocals, this is another one that feels like a stairway to nowhere, and another cut that just feels like it lacks the emotional punch to make it worth returning to. Then there is the track Having No Head, which is the longest song on the album at 6 minutes. Maybe it's also worth pointing out that it is a fully instrumental track. Even if it sounds alright, I can tell you, Lost My Head, this ain't. Even if it was clearly trying to be, it's not. Oddly, I did like the track What Should I Say for its light electronic elements and some of the subtle experimentation on the vocals on the track. It doesn't really save the album, but it is a very good track that I did enjoy, although that was immediately ruined by the song Bagsy Not in Net, another short and completely inconsequential moment that adds nothing to the album. It's yet another moment that feels like Maddie saying, you know what, I know everyone except for the dude that's talking in this video right now hated 2-time, 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 so let's just see how many ways we can build a song off of the same sound and style as that one and put it on this album. Don't Worry is kind of an interesting track in that it sees Maddie singing with his father Tim. It's a piano ballad that almost has this lullaby-esque sound to it. Unfortunately, it's yet another cut that I feel nothing listening to. Though, to top the record off, we have the track Guys, which is essentially Maddie's tribute to the rest of the band members. It's another more mellow piece of smooth indie pop, and if nothing else, it does close out this record nicely, and it is a good gesture from Maddie as a tribute to the rest of the band. But otherwise, I just don't know what else to say about this. I don't know the last time I was this disappointed in an album. I don't remember the last time I've seen this significant of a drop-off in quality from an artist that I really enjoyed. It's an album that leaves me with a lot of emotions. Upset, angry, disappointed, you name it. This was just a complete letdown. It's kind of hard for me to believe and say in the same breath that the group that made this album is the same band that's responsible for I Like It When You Sleep. I've heard a lot of people call this album pretentious, and maybe it is. Maybe a lot of the group's music is. Maybe when you dig into the lyrics, you'll find that. But you know what else the album is? Boring. Painfully boring. Multiple tracks on this album feel like they're built in the same exact way, to the point where they just become tiring. And even Maddie's typically charismatic vocals aren't really on display for much of the album. Much of his hooks generally fall flat. And while the group has made some slightly long albums before, this one just feels way too bloated. Listening to this album honestly felt like the longest 80 minutes of my life. Most of the time with these long, bloated 20+ track albums, there tends to be this feeling that the artists are just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks, and that's what's happening here. The 1975 just sounds like they don't care. They sound like they are throwing that shit at the wall and just praying that it sticks. And yes, some of the shit sticks, and there are some good tracks on the album. But the lows on the album are really low, and the highs just aren't high enough to stand up with a lot of the group's better work. To me, the Music for Cars era of the 1975 music has been rather messy, and the rollout for this album has been quite a spectacle and not exactly a great one. And as the ending to this era, I can only say that I'm glad it's over. I really just hope the band can bounce back on their next album, because this one just isn't it. I wanted to give it a bad rating to be slightly nice to it, but I just kind of have to say it how it is. The 1975's Notes on a Conditional Form is gonna get an awful rating from me as well. Damn, 2 awful ratings in one video and not much of a light at the end of the tunnel. That kind of sucks. Sorry, 1975. I still love the old records, but this one is just not doing it for me. Yeah, it's probably the worst I've felt in a review about the music that I'm talking about. At least when I did my 3-in-1 review of Joyner Lucas, Party Next Door, and Dua Lipa, even though 2 of those albums were awful, at least Dua Lipa's album was so amazing. Now it's a double feature review with 2 awful albums and not much else positive to say about the music. Damn, I've had to listen to a lot of awful albums this year. I feel like the worst of list is gonna be a bit bumping by the end of this year. But of course, these are just my opinions on these albums. You guys might love them, and if you do, great. I'm glad you guys found something in them that I didn't. But what are your thoughts? Are you as disappointed in these 2 albums as I am? Did they give you exactly what you were looking for? Were you indifferent to both? Do you just plan on avoiding both of them? Whatever your thoughts are, leave them down in the comments. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thank you. If If not, you guys know I'm no beggar. I will not be bothered if you choose not to subscribe. I just appreciate you taking the time to check out my content regardless. As for what's next, I'm seeing that next week is Lady Gaga's new album, and supposedly Lil Yachty is dropping Lil Boat 3 next week. I will check out both, but please can one or both of you help get this year back on track in regards to music, because a lot of the albums that I've had to review and listen to lately have been not so great, so can we get a good week next week, please? Either way, stay tuned for those reviews, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.